Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Nick Winn.
Hi there, can everybody hear me? All right, guess you can. All right, let's start this presentation here. What are we doing? All right, so this presentation is about using Nagios XI to empower developers to own their own checks. This is to empower, give your developers the ability to add checks, remove checks, modify their own checks. Basically, you're giving them the power to do things without you. This is a very big move, and I was just telling a couple people in the crowd that this has a trust implication with it. You have to be able to trust your developers. But moving on here, let me introduce myself. My name's Nick Winn. I've been around IT since 1999. I have seen a lot of mistakes in humongous environments. I've worked for companies that have had 56 data centers across the globe, everybody doing monitoring differently. And I've taken down my fair share of production environments. And if you've never worked in IT and you've never taken down a production environment, you're doing something wrong. It's just something that we do, we mess up, and we learn. And that's how I've learned how to empower my developers. It was trial by fire. I believe in keeping everything simple and never repeating yourself. It's something my algebra teacher from middle school taught me. Never stop learning, and I've been using Nagios since 2007. I would say a solid 5 years of Nagios and another almost a year of Nagios XI now. So who do I work for? I work for a company called ReturnPath. That's our marketing line up there. ReturnPath is the global leader of email intelligence. Our products are powered by proprietary data that enables our clients to get delivered to the inbox and stay there. Pardon me. So ReturnPath has a bunch of products that we offer. Including what's not mentioned here, we control the largest whitelist in North America. That is us. But more importantly, ReturnPath is broken down into groups. We are an agile shop. And does everybody know what agile means? No? Okay, so agile means we kind of, we get together every 2 weeks, we make a plan, and we execute on that plan. We do have long-term roadmaps, roadmap goals, but those change quickly. And being agile is being able to serve these goals and meet these requirements quickly. So there's a lot of prioritization that goes into it. We change course often. It's agile. And we're also a DevOps shop. So the operation teams work closely with the developers. Everybody on my team, someone works with a product group. That's just how it is. It's kind of like one of us, one of them. So full disclosure, I'm still a Nagios Ninja in training. You may see me post in the Nagios forums under Technic, and my signature says Nagios Ninja in training. I don't know everything, but I know a little bit, and what I'm about to present to you may work in your environment, it may not. So take that for what you will. All right, so the Nagios XI story at ReturnPath started off, we had these problems. And the problems were mostly related to developer groups making changes to their products within the 2-week iteration and required us to change service checks, upgrade Nagios, and do things in a quick manner, even though we had other things that we had to do. And because of this, it slowed down their iteration. They couldn't release code on time, and we were the subject of a couple of engineering meetings where they said that my team or the other team that had power of Nagios was holding up their progress. So my boss came to me, told me to find a solution, something to shift the responsibilities away from my team and the application support team to the developer teams, to allow them to move forward without us. And I went out, I tested a couple of different products, ultimately landing on Nagios XI as being a solution to these issues. Nagios XI solved a couple of problems for us. One, it had a GUI. The developers were unsure about the command line, and we didn't want to raise the bar to be able to enable them to own these things, so we wanted to lower the bar. And Nagios XI had a GUI. That was a big sell, and that's what, actually that was probably the biggest selling point of Nagios XI. So we're going to cover the specific points here of how Nagios XI solved these problems for us. The methodologies and shortcuts are required to make them work. Now, really, Nagios XI is not designed to have so many people with their hands in the pot at one time. It's designed for a limited user base and not for the 100+ people that we have. At any given time, my company has 60 developers managing directly their Nagios checks, their host, their templates. And to make that happen, we had to develop methodologies for them. Methodologies like naming conventions, processes, and some shortcuts. So we will get to that. Excuse me one moment. All right, next slide. So before we went to Nagios XI, we were using Nagios Core. And to get the developers using Nagios Core, we went over what had to happen. We talked to the developers, and this is kind of their feedback. The developers didn't have the training and the access to get into Nagios Core. The iterations moved quickly and would bottleneck while waiting for us to make changes. The teams that had access to the previous installation, which was my team and the application support team, didn't fully understand Nagios. That was an issue. The revision control system, which we were using at the time, before we went to Nagios XI, was just simple RCS. And some people thought it was overly complicated, the checking in, our checking out file, changing it and checking it in. And overall, most people were not comfortable with the command line. As a Linux system administrator myself, I prefer the CLI, but 9 times out of 10, people prefer the GUI. All right, solving problems with Nagios XI. This is what we've discovered, this is how Nagios XI improved our situation. The GUI lowered the bar of entry, allowing more people to become comfortable with Nagios XI. Again, biggest selling point. The iterations were no longer bottleneck while waiting for my teams to make modification to monitoring, to add stuff, remove stuff. And so that was good. We had to train the entire organization to make people comfortable with Nagios XI. It was a little bit of a daunting project, but we had training. And because the developers are all in product groups, we trained group by group. And during the training, we set them down. We had them add checks, remove checks, add their contact, change their own password, and actually create a check that would fail. It would email them or email their group overall. It was a hands-on training. And because Nagios XI had configuration snapshots built in, so when things went south, it was easy to roll back, and we didn't have to worry about revision control. Now, separately, Nagios XI has the ability to do like the weekly backups and the monthly backups. You can hang on to those for long periods of time. And by default, Nagios XI stores 20 configuration snapshots. You can keep more than that if you want to. My company holds on to 90 days worth of configuration snapshots, just in case we ever want to roll back to a specific setting. So, shortfalls of Nagios. Again, Nagios XI was not meant to have so many people in with their hands in the pot at one time. And same thing with CCM. We had this one situation where a developer was changing a service check just at the right time that another developer was changing that same service check. Well, nothing kept the second developer from click and edit and changing that service check. So everything that the second guy or the first guy changed and saved got overwritten by the second guy. CCM just was never designed with that scenario in mind. So that's just a few shortfalls. There's going to be more that I talk about later on. Communication within teams is a big part of using Nagios. Because Nagios wasn't meant to be used in this method, and CCM doesn't support row locking, you have to ingrain in your developers a strong sense to talk to one another. The other thing that we had to do to make Nagios XI work for empowering our developers was naming standards. If you just give a bunch of people access to Nagios, they all name things differently. Like I might name a disk check something, and you might name a disk check hard drive check. It's inherent with how people think. So how do you get around this? How do you get people to name stuff in a uniform way across the board? You come up with naming standards. So having naming standards has a bunch of benefits. One of them is going to be, it's going to save you a lot of time. It's going to allow you to look at a configuration file, look at a service check, and be like, oh, this group owns this service check, it does this, and if I have any questions, I know who to go to for this. It guarantees that naming of objects don't clash between groups using Nagios XI as well. I've had a couple of developers try to write a check and just name it Oracle. You can't do that because there's already a service check named Oracle, and they didn't search for service checks with that name beforehand. But having a naming standard will help prevent that. And if you get your naming standards right, and you want to move on to the next level of managing these service checks and doing mass changes to them, it helps you a lot in CCM. So does everybody know what CCM is? All right, do you know where CCM stores its database at? All right. Oh, for those that don't know, CCM stores everything in a MySQL database. And CCM does allow some mass change control within the GUI, but if you want to reassociate service checks to a specific service group, you can't do that in CCM. And there's a few other things that you can't change. In steps a Ninja with SQL experience. And because everything is a uniform name by group, you can throw custom SQL statements at the database and do a mass update of a set of checks or a set of objects without ever having to touch the GUI. So this right here helps in the future. If you're planning on doing more stuff at the database line, like my company is, having a standard is required to move forward. Something that I think most of you probably know already, Nagios sorts everything alphabetically, starting with numbers. And depending on how you name things, what type of naming convention you come up with, you can use this in your favor for readability, organization, and to just keep things sane. So, like I mentioned earlier, my company is broke up into product groups, and the product group that I spend my time on is called certification. You can use the naming scheme that we're going to talk about to group everything certification together in CCM and also in your service check displays inside Nagios. So let's jump ahead here. Let's look at some naming examples. Here, I've got group -service name -optional information with some examples. So my certification group gets data from Hotmail, and it's a FBL feed. So for naming, we name it certification -hotmail_feed-FBL. If I wanted to go into CCM and see everything owned by certification, I just go type search for certification inside CCM. I see all their checks. Same thing later on. If you put everything in proper service groups, you can do the same. Web integration hyphen the name of the check hyphen and then optional information. So this checks the port 8210 is open. And the optional information doesn't have to be there. You can leave that blank, but the group and the service name, those are the two things required. Some more naming examples of service groups. So in our organization, we have sub-service groups that are members of bigger service groups. Our top-level service groups, we just do the name of the group -all. And then they can go in and create smaller service groups that are a member of Certification All. So when you go to the Certification All service group, it shows everything under the subgroups as well. I've toyed around with changing the way, or the order of how things appear, because again, it is 0 through 9 showed first, then alphabetically. I've had people ask me if they can make like the main base all service groups go to the top, and then subgroups at the bottom. And the only way I was able to do that was by putting a 0 in front of my main base groups, and then letting the others stay as certification or whatever the group name. It works. It's not pretty. People have asked multiple times in the forums, and I've opened up a bug tracker for this as a future enhancement. We may get some sorting features to service groups and host groups in the future. So again, the benefits of proper naming: 1 is organization. 2, it guides people to kind of explain what they are, and people can look at a service check, be like, oh, this group owns this service check, hyphen what it is, and maybe some additional information. In the future, if you develop a standard like this, it's going to make maintaining the CCM database and doing CCM edits directly much easier. And also, it will help you if you decide to do more automated things within Nagios XI. And when I say automated, my company is using Ansible right now for configuration management. And Ansible inserts into Nagios XI via static files configuration for hosts that we have in the cloud, in Rackspace Cloud, AWS Cloud, and it references templates, contacts, and other resources that are defined in Nagios XI. And because everything has a base name to it, is easy for them to do the automated interaction. So this is about where I've gotten burned recently at work. When I designed everything for Nagios XI, our product groups the names were set. And just recently, we've decided to rename our product groups to different things. Well, now I've got all of these checks that are defined for old product groups that have been broken up and are no longer there. And because of the way I did the naming convention, it was possible for me to go into CCM and do an update on everything with these rows and update the product groups, the product group names to the new names of those groups. If I had not done this, it probably would have been a headache, a lot of clicking through the GUI and renaming everything manually. It would have been a headache. So if you have a good roadmap of where your organization is going to go, it will help you in planning these standards for which your developers will follow when you hand over control. And I recommend looking 2 years out. Some people, depending on your organization, can look up to 4 or 5 years in the future. But if you have a good understanding of your roadmap, it will help you with the name and standards that you develop. So these are some additional problems that we ran into. Having so many users in Nagios XI, we had to create accounts in Nagios XI and CCM. The LDAP Active Directory plugins still require you to manually create the account. And if you have Active Directory, you could do the association there. But still, you had to manually create the accounts, which was a bit of a headache. So that was one of the problems we ran into. Someone just had to go manually create everybody's account. Next problem is related to trust. For the developers to take this level of control, we had to trust them. We had to say that they were admins. The levels that Nagios XI offer you, and you have to be an admin to make changes to certain things, to rename, to add stuff. So we had to swallow the bullet and trust the developers. Now the developers, because they're admins, they have full control of our monitoring environment. They can accidentally remove other checks. They can accidentally disable stuff. They can modify other user accounts. It's not the best scenario, but it works. You just have to trust them. Trust them to do the right thing. And as far as I know, there's no changes in the near future that would eliminate the need for admin access. And also, if a developer put in a bad update and wanted to revert the config to something else, they have to be admin to do that. So the conclusion from all of this is Nagios XI has empowered a large group of developers in my company to manage their own service checks related to their platform. It's taken the target off of my team's back and put them in charge. And developing the standards for Nagios XI is the only way I could have done this. Otherwise, I would have had all these checks and service groups named whatever they wanted to, or what they felt was appropriate at the time, and things just wouldn't make sense at all. And Nagios XI can be used as an efficient component for streamlining the release process that's required of Agile shops. Again, it goes back to standards. If you set your standards up correctly and everybody's on the same page and does things appropriately, Nagios XI is a perfect tool for this. So the developers were really excited to finally have this power to take us out of the equation. And this is just what some of the developers said. It gives them the ability to quickly add products without having to wait for free ops resources. That's very true. And it gives them the flexibility of determining the alert procedures. Before, when we set this stuff up, they never saw the alerts. They just trusted that the alerts got sent to application support and followed a appropriate escalation path. But now they see it, they know how it works. It's nice to have developers able to manage alert setup and maintenance windows. I like this one. It's nice not to have to worry about conf files. This is definitely from application support. Broader interaction with development teams and learning how we monitor things, and much easier to visualize creating the checks through Nagios XI interface, much easier to maintain them in this format. And I think my feedback as a ops team, it's been a great move. It's taken the responsibility off of my team and out of application support and put the responsibility on them. So we are no longer the roadblocks. And if they want to mess around with how something fires or how a service check fires, they can do that. They can also, it gives them the ability to go in and customize their checks, their plugins. Maybe they want to add more information. One of the things that came from this is introducing variables into service checks. We've started writing custom variables into our service checks, and when Nagios sends the alert out that something's failed, it now includes the severity level. Is it high severity, medium, or low? And they can also include product notes and other dependencies that is not easily defined in the service check itself. The developers are coming up with cool things to do with this, and if you turn over the power, I'm sure your developers will do the same. Other thoughts is it's an uphill process training your developers. Not every one of them is going to understand object inheritance, and you have to spend time sitting with them and doing it. You might have to do it 5 times. But again, I stand firm in saying it's well worth the trial and error to get this right. And my company, we're still not 100% there yet, but we're closer now than we've ever been. And I can only speculate, but I can say that time-wise, it's been a huge savings. My team can focus on building data centers and doing other DevOpsy things than working with Nagios. So that concludes my presentation. Q&A. Does anybody have any questions?
Hi, my name is Yulak. Who owns the service checks? If you're saying that the developers creates it, so when the service checks, goes array or go wrong, who owns that ultimately?
So in my organization, we have a common escalation path where everything goes through an application support group. They get the initial alert unless the developer has designated someone else to get the alert. Some developers prefer that the alerts come directly to them, and they will handle it on a case-by-case basis, but our standard escalation protocol goes through application support. With the severity level that developers have started including, which is the low, medium, or high severity, application support can then make the call, do I fix it now, or do I escalate to the on-call engineer or on-call developer? And our application support will attempt to fix most problems if they can. If they can't fix it, they look at the priority level. If it's a priority 3, which is only business hours, they let it sit until business hours, and the on-call developer gets a page when he comes in, and he can fix it. The second level is like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 7 days a week. When that criteria is met, the application support person couldn't fix it, the developer gets paged for it. Or if it's a system check, like a disk check, my team gets paged for it at that point. If it's priority 1, which is 24/7, super important app, if the support can't fix it, it goes directly out to a developer or whoever's responsible. So again, if it's something system related, something like SSH or the Oracle database, that goes to my team. If it's their application, it'll go to the developer on call. Did that answer your question?
So how do you monitor who's making these changes or who's putting in new checks? Or do you? Or
We don't really monitor that part because we trust our developers to do the right thing and to test their check out before sending it down the normal escalation path. But Nagios XI does have an audit log, which you can follow. You can see who's making changes to what. And it's great to capture that just for historical purposes. So you can say, hey, this developer changed this check, but the audit logs don't really give you a detail of what they changed sometimes. So if they change like a retry interval, then that's not going to show up in an audit log. You'll just know that this developer was the last person in to make this change. Fortunately, we've not had to go point fingers at anybody in the 6 months that we've empowered our developers. So I've not had to build a case scenario on that.
Yeah, could you go into more detail on how you do the mass changes with MySQL using SQL? Do you, for example, shut Nagios XI down before you jump in there? Or?
No. So the way CCM works is it exports what's in the database to flat files. So because it's not like a real-time link there, Nagios can stay running. That's not a big deal. Go in, log in as the Nagios QL user, or if you create additional users for it, make your change, and then do an apply configuration within the web GUI. And that will dump out the configuration files to the running config. I highly recommend you make a backup of the database. Under user local Nagios XI scripts, there's a backup _xi.sh. Use that script, make that backup. Heck, make a backup of the backup just in case. And go in, properly test, make sure Nagios reloads properly, go in. Look at the objects.cache file. Do you guys know what the objects.cache file is? All right, for those of you that don't, if you look under user local Nagios var objects.cache, it is a collection of all the configs that Nagios saw when it started up. So think of it as a dumping place. It's one file that has all the configs. And that file is great for troubleshooting. It's great for looking at to make sure things are set properly. It is just a great resource. So dump it, test it, and check to make sure your changes are there. And the CCM database is weird. well, weird to say the least. They use table linking to link rows between tables. So you'll see TBL_services, that's where your services live. And then you'll see things like things that link services to contacts and services to contact groups, services to service groups. And it uses a ID slave and an ID master, which is the ID row of the table to make that link. So I hope I answered your question. All right. Any other questions?
Well, Nick, you must explained everything just perfectly. Some good questions.
I think I scared him, to be honest.
No. It's a big room. It's an intimate group. How about a nice round of applause for Nick?